there! Welcome back. This is Miss Stephanie from the Chester Public Library, and this is part 4 of our virtual Read Aloud book club. Our book right now is The BFG by Roald Dahl. If you haven't caught parts 1, 2, and 3, go back on our page and check out parts 1, 2, and 3, or you'll be pretty confused about where we're at in the book. Today we are picking up at the chapter called The Bloodbottler. We're going to read a few chapters today, and then we'll pick up again next time. So, The Bloodbottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I's hearing you jabbling. Who's you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Bloodbottler!" But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozzcumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I's jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piffle ziz!" shouted the Bloodbottler. "Bug swallop!" he boomed. "You's talking to a human being. That's what I's thinking." "No, no!" cried the BFG. "Yes, yes!" boomed the Bloodbottler. "I's guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I's winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. "There's no one in here," he stammered. "Why don't you leave me alone?" The Bloodbottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little swish fiddler, squimpy little butterwort, prunty little pog swizzler. I's now going to search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you's going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snozzcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Bloodbottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across his face, almost ear to ear, and had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurtery lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Bloodbottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your bibbling bottles!" he shouted. "What did you put it in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You's only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dotty as a dog swaggler!" cried the Bloodbottler. Soon the Bloodbottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozzcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the Bloodbottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in slimy, soft stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozzcumber, large enough for her to crouch in so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place. But what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The Bloodbottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the Bloodbottler grabbed the half-eaten snozzcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumpelling off that high table, so where's you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthy, rotsome glubbage you's eating, boomed the Bloodbottler, holding up the partly eaten snozzcumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash. For a moment, the Bloodbottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. That is the scrumdiddlyumptious snozzcumber, he said. I's guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a snozzcumber, Bloodbottler? Human beings is juicier, the Bloodbottler said. You is talking rummy-talk, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the Bloodbottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. I's happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on. But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper. The Bloodbottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. You is not switch fiddling me, is you? Said the Bloodbottler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting about how scrumdiddlyumptious this wonder veg is. The BFG could see the greedy Bloodbottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not healthsome always to be eating meaty things. Just this once, the Bloodbottler said. I's going to taste these rotsome eats of yours, but I's warning you that if it is filthsome, I's smashing it all over your sludgy little head. He picked up the snozzcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, don't! But she would have been even more certain of death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch, and the Bloodbottler bit a huge chunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. "Blech!" roared the Bloodbottler. And then he spat. One of the great lumps of snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black coat hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugger, roared the Bloodbottler. You little pig swiller! He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozzcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it, yelled the Bloodbottler. That is the most disgusting taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing slacks like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beans. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is guzzly and glumptious, shouted the Bloodbottler, and tonight I's galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I's choosing Chile? I's not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I's choosing Chile, the Bloodbottler said, because I's fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important that I has plenty of cold eats in this scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very Chile. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers, the Bloodbottler said. I's very fond indeed of English school chidlers. They has a nice inky booky flavor. Perhaps I'll change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. You is an insult to the giant peoples, shouted the Bloodbottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pibbling little pitsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I'm so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. And there I was telling him to eat the filsome snozzcumber and you was all inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chiddler, cried the BFG. You's all covered in snozzcumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best he could. I's hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can't think up a way of doing it. Our next chapter is called Frobscottle and Whiz Poppers. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not only extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. Had she been at home, she would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgusting smelly snozzcumbers? She asked. Not even a fizzwinkle, answered the big friendly giant. In that case, may I please have a little water? She said. Water? Said the BFG, frowning mightily. What is water? We drink it, Sophie said. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking frobscottle. Is it as nasty as your snozzcumbers? Sophie asked. Nasty, cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Frobscottle is sweet and jumbly. He got up from his chair and went to a second huge cupboard. He opened it and took out a glass bottle that must have been 6 feet tall. The liquid inside it was pale green and the bottle was half full. Here is frobscottle, he cried, holding a bottle up high and proud, as though it contained some rare wine. Delumptious, fizzy frobscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried, and indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of traveling upwards and bursting on the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. The pale green frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning the wrong way? Asked the BFG. In our fizzy drinks, Sophie said, the bubbles always go up and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, cried the BFG. You mustn't ever be having the bubbles going upwards. That's the most flesh-bunking rubbish I ever is hearing. Why do you say that? Sophie asked. Why is you asking me why? Cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You is actually meaning to tell me you cannot see why it is a scrawny mistake to have the bubbles flying up instead of down? You said it was flesh-bunking. Now you say it's scrawny. What is it? Sophie asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is a flesh-bunking and a scrawny mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be as quacky as a duckhound. By Ringo, your head must be so full of frog squinkers and buzzwangles, I's frittered to know if you can think at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? Sophie asked. I will explain, said the BFG. But tell me first, what name is you calling your frobscottle by? One is Coke, Sophie said. Another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. And the bubbles is all going up? They all go up, Sophie said. Catastrophe, cried the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a catastrophe disastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you will listen carefully, I will try to explain, said the BFG. But your brain is so full of bug whiffles, I doubt you will ever understand. I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well then. When you was drinking this cokey drink of yours, said the BFG, is it going straight down into your tummy? Is that right, or is it left? It's right, said Sophie. And the bubbles is going also into your tummy, right or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubbles is fizzing upwards? Of course, Sophie said. Which means, said the BFG, that they will all come swish-whiffling up your throat and out of your mouth and make a foulsome belchy burp. That is often true, Sophie said. But what's wrong with a little burp now and again? It's sort of fun. Burping is filthsome, the BFG said. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said, what was it you called it? Frobscottle, said the BFG. With frobscottle, Sophie said, the bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards, and that could have a far nastier result. Why nasty? asked the BFG, frowning. Because, Sophie said, blushing a little, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. A whiz-popper, cried the BFG, beaming at her. Us giants is making whiz-poppers all the time. Whiz-popping is a sign of happiness. It is music in our ears. You surely is not telling me that a little whiz-popping is forbidden among human beings? It is considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But you's whiz-popping, is you not, now and again? Asked the BFG. Everyone is whiz-popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie said. The kings and queens are whiz-popping. Presidents are whiz-popping. Glamorous film stars are whizzing and whiz-popping. Little babies are whiz-popping, but where I come from, it is not polite to talk about it. Redunculous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz-poppers, then why you not talk about it? We is now having a swizzle of this delicious frobscottle, and you will see the happy result. The BFG shook the bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous guzzling swig. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. For a few moments, the big friendly giant stood quite still, and a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long, wrinkly face. Then suddenly, the heavens opened, and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled on their shelves. But most astonishing of all, the force of the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant clear off his feet, like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried when he came down to earth again. Now that is whiz-popping for you. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping his neck of the enormous bottle upwards. Don't you have a cup? Sophie said. No cups, only bottle. Sophie opened her mouth, and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous frobscottle down her throat. And oh gosh, how delicious it was! It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavor. And the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. It's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping his ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles traveling lower and lower down her tummy, and then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. Bravo! Shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You is very good for a beginner. Let's have some more. All right, we are going to do one more chapter. This one is called Journey to Dream Country. After the mad frobscottle party was over, Sophie settled herself again on top of the enormous table. You's feeling better now? Asked the big friendly giant. Much better, thank you, Sophie said. Whenever I's feeling a bit squatty, the big friendly giant said, a few gollops of frobscottle is always making me hopscotchy again. I must say it's quite an experience, Sophie said. That's a rat's twizzler, the BFG said. It's gloriumptious. He turned away and strode across the cave and picked up his dream-catching net. I's galloping off now, he said, to catch some more wapsy-whiffling dreams for my collection. I's doing this every day without missing. Is you wishing to come with me? Not me, thank you very much, Sophie said. Not with all those other giants lurking outside. I's snuggling you very cozy into the pocket of my waistcoat, the BFG said. Then no one is seeing you. Before Sophie could protest, he had picked her up off the table and popped her into the waistcoat's pocket. There was plenty of room in there. Is you wishing for a little peephole to peep out from? He asked her. There's one here already, she said. She had found a small hole in the pocket, and when she put one eye close to it, she could see out very well indeed. She watched the BFG as he bent down and filled his suitcase with empty glass jars. He closed the lid, picked up the suitcase in one hand, took the pole with the net on the end in the other hand, and marched towards the entrance of the cave. As soon as he was outside, the BFG set off across the great hot yellow wasteland where the blue rocks lay and dead trees stood and where all the other giants were skulking about. Sophie, squatting low on her heels in the pocket of the leather waistcoat, had one eye glued to the little hole. She saw the group of enormous giants about 300 yards ahead. Hold your breaths, the BFG whispered down to her. Cross your fingers. Here we go. He was going right past all the other giants. Is you seen that whopping great one? The one nearest to us? I see him, Sophie whispered back, quivering. That is the horriblest of them all, and the biggest of them all. He's calling the flesh lump-eating giant. I don't want to hear about him, Sophie said. He's 54 feet high, the BFG said softly as he jogged along, and he is swallowing human beings like they is sugar lumps, 2 or 3 at a time. You're making me nervous, Sophie said. I's nervous myself, the BFG whispered. I always get as jumpy as a jog hopper when the flesh lump-eating giant is around. Keep away from him, Sophie pleaded. Not possible, the BFG answered. He's galloping easily 2 times as quickly as me. Shall we turn back? Sophie said. Turning back is worse, the BFG said. If they see me running away, they's all giving chase and throwing rocks. They would never eat you, though, would they? Sophie asked. Giants is never guzzling other giants. They's fighting and squarreling a lot with each other, but never guzzling. Human beings is more tasty to them. The giants had already spotted the BFG, and all heads were turning, watching him as he jogged forward. He was aiming to pass well to the right of the group. Through her little peephole, Sophie saw the flesh lump-eating giant moving over to intercept them. He didn't hurry. He just loped over casually to a point where the BFG would have to pass. The others loped after him. Sophie counted 9 of them altogether, and she recognized the Bloodbottler in the middle of them. They were bored. They had nothing to do until nightfall. There was an air of menace about them as they loped slowly across the plain with long, walloping strides, heading for the BFG. Here comes the runty one, boomed the flesh lump-eating giant. Ho, ho there, runty one. Where's your splash-winkling way into in such a hefty hurry? He shot out an enormous arm and grabbed the BFG by the hair. The BFG didn't struggle. He simply stopped and stood quite still and said, Be so kind as to be letting go of my hair, flesh lump-eater. The flesh lump-eater released him and stepped back to pace. The other giants stood around waiting for the fun to start. Now then, you little grub squiffler, boomed the flesh lump-eater. We's all of us wanting to know where you's galloping off to every day in the daytime. Nobody ought to be galloping off to anywhere until it's getting dark. The human beings could easily be spotting you and starting a giant hunt, and we's not wanting that to happen, is we not? We is not, shouted the other giants. Go back to your cave, runty one. I's not galloping to any human being country, the BFG said. I's going to other places. I's thinking, said the flesh lump-eater, that you is catching human beings and keeping them as pets. Right you is, cried the Bloodbottler. Just now I's hearing him chittering away to one of them in his cave. You's welcome to go and search my cave from frack to bunt, the BFG answered. You can go looking into every crook and nanny. There's no human beans or stringy beans or runner beans or jelly beans or any other beans in there. Sophie crouched still as a mouse inside the BFG's pocket. She hardly dared to breathe. She was terrified she might sneeze. The slightest sound or movement would give her away. Through the tiny peephole, she watched the giants clustering around the poor BFG. How revolting they were. All of them had piggy little eyes and enormous mouths with thick sausage lips. When the flesh lump-eater was speaking, she got a glimpse of his tongue. It was jet black, like a slab of black steak. Every one of them was more than twice as tall as the BFG. Suddenly, the flesh lump-eater shot out 2 enormous hands and grabbed the BFG around the waist. He tossed him high in the air and shouted, Catch him, man-hugger! The man-hugger caught him. The other giants spread out quickly in a large circle, each giant about 20 yards from his neighbor, preparing for the game they were going to play. Now the man-hugger threw the BFG high and far, shouting, Catch him, Bone Cruncher! The Bone Cruncher ran forward and caught the tumbling BFG and immediately swung him up again. Captain Child Chewer! He shouted. And so it went on. The giants were playing ball with the BFG, vying with each other to see who could throw him the highest. Sophie dug her nails into the sides of the pocket, trying to prevent herself from tumbling out when she was upside down. She felt as though she were in a barrel going over the Niagara Falls, and all the time there was the fearful danger that one of the giants would fail to catch the BFG and he would go crashing to the ground. Catch him, meat dribber! Catch him, gizzard gulper! Catch him, maid masher! Catch him, Bloodbottler! Catch him, catch him, catch him! In the end, they got bored with this game. They dumped the poor BFG on the ground. He was dazed and shattered. They gave him a few kicks and shouted, "Run, you little runt! Let us be seeing how fast you's galloping!" The BFG ran. What else could he do? The giants picked up rocks and hurled them after him. He managed to dodge them. "Ruddy little runt!" they shouted. "Troggy little twit! Shrivelly little shrimp! Mucky little midget! Squoggy little squib and grubby little grub!" At last, the BFG got clear of them all, and in another couple of minutes, the pack of giants was out of sight over the horizon. Sophie popped her head up from the pocket. "I didn't like that," she said. "Phew," said the BFG. "Few and far between. They was in a nasty crouching mood today, was they not? I's sorry you was having such a whirligig time." "No worse than you," Sophie said. "Would they ever really hurt you?" "I isn't ever trusting them," the BFG said. "How do they actually catch the humans they eat?" Sophie asked. "They's usually just sticking an arm in through the bedroom window and snitching them from their beds," the BFG said. "Like you did to me." "Ah, but I isn't eating you," the BFG said. "How else do they catch them?" Sophie asked. "Sometimes," the BFG said, "they is swimming in the sea like fishies, with only their head showing above the water, and then out comes a big hairy hand and grabbles someone off the beach." "Children as well?" "Often chidlers," the BFG said. "Little chidlers who is building sandcastles on the beach. That is who the swimming ones are after. Little chidlers is not so tough to eat as old grandmamas, so says the child-chewing giant." As they talked, the BFG was galloping fast over the land. Sophie was standing right up in his waistcoat pocket now and holding onto the edge with both hands. Her head and shoulders were in the open, and the wind was blowing in her hair. "How else do they catch people?" she asked. "All of them is having their own special ways of catching the human being. The meat-tripping giant is preferring to pretend he's a big tree growing in the park. He's standing in the park in the dusky evening, he's holding great big branches over his head, and there he's waiting until some happily families is coming to have a picnic under the spreading tree. The meat-dripping giant is watching them as they lay out their little picnic, but in the end it is the meat-dripper who is having the picnic." "It's too awful!" Sophie cried. "The gizzard-gulping giant is a city lover," the BFG went on. "The gizzard gulper is lying high up between the roofs of houses in the big cities. He's lying there snuggy as a sniggler and watching the human beings walking on the street below. And when he sees one that looks like it has a wapsy good flavor, he grabs it. He is simply reaching down and snitching it off the street like a monkey taking a nut. He says it is nice to be able to pick and choose what you's having for your supper. He says it is like choosing from a menu." "Don't people see him doing it?" Sophie asked. "Never is they seeing him. Do not forget it is dusky dark at this time. Also, the gizzard gulper has a very fast arm. His arm is going up and down quicker than Squinkers." "But if all these people are disappearing every night, surely there's some sort of an outcry," Sophie said. "The world is a whopping big place," the BFG said. "It has 100 different countries. The giants is clever. They's careful not to be skedaddling off at the same country too often. They's always switch fiddling around." "Even so," Sophie said. "Do not forget," the BFG said, "that human beings is disappearing everywhere all the time, even without the giants guzzling them up. Human beings is killing each other more quickly than the giants is doing it." "But they don't eat each other," Sophie said. "Giants isn't eating each other either," the BFG said. "Nor is giants killing each other. Giants is not very lovely, but they's not killing each other. Nor is crocodile-dillies killing other crocodile-dillies. Nor is pussycats killing pussycats. But they kill mice," Sophie said. "Ah, but they's not killing their own kind," the BFG said. "Human beings is the only animals that's killing their own kind." "Don't poisonous snakes kill each other?" Sophie asked. She was searching desperately for another creature that behaved as badly as the human. "Even poisonous snakes is never killing each other. Nor is the most fearsome creatures like tigers and rhinoceroses. None of them is ever killing their own kind. Has you ever thought about that?" Sophie kept silent. "I's not understanding human beings at all. You is a human being, and you is saying it is grizzling and horrigust for giants to be eating human beings, right or left." "Right," Sophie said, "but human beings is squishing each other all the time. They're shooting guns and going up in aeroplanes to drop their bombs on each other's heads every week. Human beings is always killing other human beings." He was right. Of course he was right, and Sophie knew it. She was beginning to wonder whether humans were actually any better than giants. "Even so," she said, defending her own race. I think it's rotten that those foul giants should go off every night to eat humans. Humans have never done them any harm. That is what the little piggy-wig is saying every day, the BFG answered. He is saying, I has never done any harm to a human being, so why should he be eating me? Oh dear, Sophie said. The human beings is making rules to suit themselves, the BFG went on. But the rules they is making do not suit the little piggy-wiggies. Am I left or right? Right, Sophie said. Giants is also making rules. Their rules is not suiting the human beings. Everybody is making his own rules to suit himself. But you don't like it that those beastly giants are eating human beings every night, do you? Sophie asked. I do not, the BFG answered firmly. One right is not making two lefts. Is you quite cozy down there in my pocket? I'm fine, Sophie said. Then suddenly, once again, the BFG went into that magical top gear of his. He began hurtling forward with phenomenal leaps. His speed was unbelievable. The landscape became blurred, and again Sophie had to duck down out of the whistling gale to save her head from being blown off her shoulders. She crouched in the pocket and listened to the wind screaming past. It came knifing in through the tiny peephole in the pocket and whooshed around her like a hurricane. But this time the BFG didn't stay in top gear long. It seemed as though he had some barrier to cross. A vast mountain perhaps, or an ocean, or a great desert. But having crossed it, he once again slowed down to his normal gallop, and Sophie was able to pop her head up and look out once more at the view. She noticed immediately that they were now in an altogether paler country. The sun had disappeared above the film of vapor. The air was becoming cooler every minute. The land was flat and treeless, but there seemed to be no color in it at all. Every minute, the mist became thicker. The air became colder and still, and everything became paler and paler until soon there was nothing but gray and white all around them. They were in a country of swirling mists and ghostly vapors. There was some sort of grass underfoot, but it was not green. It was ashy gray. There was no sign of a living creature and no sound at all except for the soft thud of the BFG's footsteps as he hurtled on through the fog. Suddenly he stopped. "We's here at last," he announced. He bent down and lifted Sophie from his pocket and put her on the ground. She was still in her nightie and her feet were bare. She shivered and stared around her at the swirling mists and ghostly vapors. "Where are we?" she asked. "We's in dream country," the BFG said. "This is where all dreams is beginning." And we will pick up next time with dream catching. All right. That was part 4 of our virtual Read Aloud book club of Roald Dahl's The BFG. Now, before we get into it for next time, I want you to think about the conversation or the little talk that Sophie and the BFG had about human beings and other creatures. Did you find that interesting? And what kind of things did it make you think about? I want you to have a little chat with your family or whoever you're watching with and talk about what kind of thoughts were going through your mind when you listen to this section of the book. And then come back and join us next week where we get into part 5 and we continue. We're almost halfway through my version of the book, so we're really getting into it. And I hope you had fun. I hope you're liking our story. I know I am. I hope you're staying safe and healthy. I hope you'll join us next time. Thanks.